My background is forestry, forest ecology. How do I help landowners use fire? Okay, because fire is a very useful tool. It's an easy tool if you follow certain rules. It's an extremely difficult tool if you don't follow those rules, and it depends on what kind of burning you want to do. So broadcast burning, burning I'm going to burn 100 acres is very, very difficult. It's very risky, and you need a lot of people there to help you. It's expensive, okay? Alternatively, burning piles is very easy to do. Well, it requires labor, but it's relatively easy to do if you do it at the right time. And you can use it not only to get rid of woody debris, you can use it to do site preparation to promote regeneration, to improve your grasses, get charcoal in the soil if carbon sequestration is something. So this is a pile that I burned on my property just 2 years ago. Perfectly safe. Anybody can do this. Besides the effects of fire itself, we're also worried about what are the impacts of fire. So this is that same pile that I burned the next day. No damage, no issues, don't really have to do anything with that. For me, it's a recreational activity. I may be weird, but most landowners, forest landowners, once they do this, they go, yeah, this is kind of fun to do. And it's part of forest maintenance on your property. So, these days, we hear a lot about fire, prescribed fire. So this is a broadcast burn in the spring that a lot of agencies are trying to do. And so this is what we think of as good fire. But for anybody to do this, you're going to want to have 20 people out there, a pumper truck, and you can only do it when the weather is cooperating. And if the weather doesn't cooperate, then we start getting into this kind of scenario, which as a private landowner, we do not want to see this. We do not want to start this because Montana law is very clear. Whoever lights the match is liable for the consequences. And then, of course, this is a really bad fire, and we see a lot of these. This is wildland fire, and certainly the Bitterroot Valley has seen more than its fair share of these. It is also a natural event that is both forest dynamics driven and climate driven. Okay, and we historically have gone through these cool wet periods, hot dry periods. And from 1940 until 1980, we were in an extremely cool wet phase of what's called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. But our forests are drought limited. So in 40 years of ample moisture, what our forests do? They grew like crazy. And they grew denser and thicker than ever before. And then we went into a drought period, and now we're seeing a lot of this. It wasn't because a lot of people put out fires. It was mainly driven by this climatic phenomenon of weather and climate fluctuations that are natural events. So when we look at fuel behavior, or fire behavior, the real basic nuts and bolts, and I'm going to go through this pretty fast, is we have different types of fuel. 1 hour, 10 hour, 100 hour, 1,000 hour fuels, and live fuels. Now, the name 1 hour fuel confuses people, because your first reaction is, well, that's how long it burns if I light it. No, it's actually what the 1 hour, 10 hour, 100 hour designation is for, is how long it takes for that fuel to lose half of its moisture. Okay? So if you have a big, wet, soggy log, it's going to take 1,000 hours of warm, dry weather before that soggy log loses half of its moisture. Grasses are 1 hour fuels. Fine twigs, some dead brush, dead juniper branches, okay? 1 hour, hot, dry, 80 degrees, out, 30% relative humidity, 1 hour, it's lost half of its moisture, okay? And moisture is a very important driving factor on how fuels burn. Then we have live fuels, grasses, green trees, green branches, things like that. And if you're fire escaping and trying to protect your home, the live fuels are another issue of debate, okay? What is a live fuel that's safe for me to have around my house, what's not? In general, any deciduous tree, aspen, ash trees, lindens, is pretty safe to have around your house, and I'll explain why. Most conifers can be safe if they're well watered. If they're drought stressed, then they're not safe, okay? So it all depends on what your watering regime is and your other fuel matrix out there. You've probably seen the fire triangle et nauseum. That means till you puke. For fire to burn, you need air, heat, and fuel. But there's some things to think about in all this. So fuel starts out cold, okay? The point at which something ignites in a flame, so you have a lighter. Thought I had one in my pocket. There we go. We have a flame, okay? How hot is that flame? I can obviously put my finger through it. But typically for something to ignite, it has to reach 572 degrees Fahrenheit. That's dry paper, newspaper, when you put it in there, okay? Water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? So for anything to burn, the water has to boil off of it first because the water will absorb all that heat. So try lighting a wet tissue paper. Doesn't work, right? Because all that water has to evaporate, turn into vapor at 212 degrees Fahrenheit before that fuel can heat up to 572 degrees and ignite, okay? And this is why live fuel moisture is so important on the shrubbery and the trees, what you have around your house. All the water has to boil off of it before it ignites. And that's why on the landscapes, and I'll show you pictures, we have what I call the clear cut phenomenon. These well-hydrated little trees, because they're not using a lot of water, don't burn. Everything around them is black, and you can find the valley complex, every major fire. Those clear cuts are these green blocks on the landscape when everything around them is black, because their live fuel moisture is so high. And so this is the same thing in landscaping around your house. You want to have vegetation that's well hydrated. And conifers have oils and waxes that catch fire. But if they're hydrated, they're well watered, they won't burn. Okay, so this is very, very important, and why water is such a big player in fuel. So, demonstrate, there's several ways in which heat is transferred. So here I'm burning a pile on my property again, in between trees, without any damage, because the trees are well hydrated. It's a little rainy outside, so the leaves are a little wet too, so more moisture on it. Okay, so heat transfer occurs through radiation. Radiation is what you get when you stand next to a wood stove, and you can feel that heat coming off of it. So anything warmer than minus 273 degrees Fahrenheit, which is absolute zero, radiates energy. The hotter it is, the more energy it radiates. The heat from radiation dissipates you lose about half for every foot you go in humid air, okay? So radiation is one way in which heat transfers. The other one that's really important is called convection, okay? So when your fuel gets past 572 degrees and all is burning, and you can get temperatures as high as 2,000 degrees in that fire if you have the right fuels. That's when you can start turning metal red hot and melting glass bottles and all that kind of stuff. But the fire needs oxygen. So in the center of the fire, it's oxygen depleted, so things are getting turned into gas. And when that gas comes up here, it mixes with oxygen, it ignites, okay? And hot air rises, so this is a convection, what we call convection column, okay? This is when you light a blowtorch and you feel the heat coming off of it, okay? Or a forced air heater, okay? So convection can be a lot more dangerous because it's very focused, okay? And typically your convection column or your flame length will be 3 times the height of your fuel. There we go. We get radiation, convection column, and then there's the third one, which is burning embers, okay? And that's actually conduction, because you have something burning that's going to land on something, and that heat is going to be directly transferred to that something. And burning embers are something of extreme concern, and that's why even if you have this area around here contained, you got water on it, those embers are going to go somewhere, and if the conditions are dry, they're going to light stuff on fire. Most houses that people lose in communities from a fire are because burning embers are landing on their roofs, their porches, eaves, wherever you have a fuel collection. It's not a 300-foot wall of flame consuming the houses right in front there. It's wherever people haven't firewise their house, and you have ignition points. So I always tell people that on a hot summer day, if I can take one of those wooden farmer's matches, light it, and ignite any part of my house is not safe from a wildfire. We want to think about kinds of fuel, species, fuel moisture, size and shape, fuel loading, horizontal continuity, vertical arrangement. I'm going to show you examples of that. That's just, you know, if you make a list, okay, these are things you got to think about. And so fine fuels, or tree canopy, we think of when we're looking at a forested situation. Shrub stratum, low vegetation, grasses and forbs, that's the one you really got to pay attention to, okay? Woody fuel stratum, how much stuff is on the ground? And again, we'll cover all that in greater detail. Mosses, lichens, litter. Many of the lichens are very flammable when they're dry. And then there's the duff layer. And the duff is not something you worry about getting away from you. It's something you worry about in long-term effects because that duff will burn for months and months and months. And if you get out, if you're a hunter at all in the fall, all of you have probably hiked out in the forest up on a mountaintop some point chasing elk around, and you find where someone lit a campfire and they left a week ago, and that fire is smoldering around down the duff still. Okay, so that's a whole different category of things. So the most dangerous, here you go. And yes, I took this picture in the bitterroot. Okay, so cheatgrass. I mean, cheatgrass is a spring annual. It's an exotic. Its whole strategy is to germinate and use water before our native grasses germinate and use it. And then in June, you already see the hillsides turning brown because it produces a seed head, it dies. Its whole strategy is use the water, produce a seed, and die. So it is the perfect fuel, and it loves fire because the fire will kill or set everything else back and create a better fuel bed for its seeds. Okay, and so range fires are fast. The Boise Foothills fire was clocked at over 80 miles an hour. Okay, the Van Gulch fire that is very famous because it killed a bunch of firefighters out on the Missouri River breaks was largely a grass fire. Okay, it was in the trees, but the fire that caught the firefighters was a grass fire going up the mountainside. Okay, so you get, if your grass is that tall, you're getting 12-foot flame lengths. The flames only last 5 minutes. They're through. But even though you might be able to hold your breath for 5 minutes, your skin will not survive 5 minutes of that standing in a blowtorch. Okay, so grass fires are the ones that scare me the most, and they're the ones that escape. So now in a forest setting, we get Doug fir and ponderosa pine, and we get the needles hung up in there. This is as bad as grass when you have this kind of a setting. So it's not the tree itself that's really promoting the fire. It's the dead twigs and the pine needles that are airily suspended, lots of oxygen. And so that's very flashy, and once you get a flame in that, it just blows up on you in a heartbeat. So this is bad stuff to have, and this is why we try to do understory vegetation management to control fires. Now, of course, you can get these kind of settings too, where trees grow too thick, too dense, go tall, they blow over. It's just not a structurally good thing. Now you have fine fuels for the ignition. You got the 10-hour, 100-hour fuels that just get hotter and hotter. So this is the perfect recipe for having a big blow up. And so this is kind of the stuff we want to clean up around our houses, around our communities. Big logs. Well, you always hear big logs are not of concern to wildfire folks. It's the fine fuels because that ignites quickly and moves quickly and all that stuff. Not entirely true, because when we have 2 to 3 years of drought, these are the 1,000-hour fuels, these guys dry out. These are like atom bombs. It takes a lot to get them lit. But when they are lit, they give off 1,000 times more energy than the grasses do. And this is where you get the convection columns that get 30,000 feet in the air and are blowing embers everywhere. And so, like last summer, we had a lot of fires, but this stuff was wet and it didn't ignite. So even though they were some pretty good fires, they were 1,000, 3,000 acres. But 2,000, these guys were dry. And we had 300,000 acre fires because it just puts out so much more energy. So in terminology, we have surface fuels, we have fire ladders, and we have torching. And torching is what we want to avoid because this torching will now throw embers all over the place. Okay, so, and if we have lots of trees that are dense, that have low fuel moisture, sometimes combined with a lot of surface fuels as well, we get what's called a running crown fire. But during the day, and this is now very important if you're burning piles, temperature changes, and with temperature changes, humidity changes. Because relative humidity is the amount of water that's in the air divided by the amount of water the air can hold. Okay? So, and when air is cold, it holds a lot less water than when it's hot. And the ability to hold water is a geometric progression. That means for every 10 degrees change in temperature, the capacity of the air to hold water doubles. Okay, so you get the doubling effect going on. So in the morning, like this morning, was right around freezing. The relative humidity was 100%. The air was totally saturated, which is why snow was falling and rain was falling, because when the air is saturated, it can't absorb water anymore. Okay? As the temperature then increases during the day, and what are we up to now? Maybe 40 degrees. Okay, it stops raining because the air is absorbing the rain before it hits us, and we see this in the summer in Montana all the time. We see the rain, but it never hits the surface. But as the temperature increases, now we're, in the morning, now, say today, we're up to 60 degrees, we're now going to be at our relative humidity of maybe 50%. Because as the air is warmed, the actual water in the air hasn't changed, but its ability to hold water changes. And the reason that's important is because this dry air will suck water out of anything. That's the drying effect. So now, if you're following fire regulations and you're going to burn, what do the regulations say when your fire should burn? From 10 to 4, right? I rarely ignite my piles in the morning. Because if I ignite here when the humidity is low, my fire is going to be hottest when the humidity is the lowest and the risk of escape is much, much higher. I usually light right here because then the air is cooling and the humidity increases, and by the time my fire is causing an issue, it has the least likely chance of escaping if you're burning piles. You want to burn when the humidity is increasing, not decreasing. Okay? So I understand the reason for the 10 to 4. But burning woody piles, you already have an exemption because there's no way your pile is going to be out by 4. Okay? So the trick is you want to burn it when it's safe to burn. And the other part is you don't want to produce a lot of smoke. And that'll be the other thing we're going to get into here. How do you do piles that don't smoke everybody out of the valley? Okay? So, all right. So, yeah, if we were to graph the relative humidity, that's what it does, okay? Morning, we're almost always at the dew point. That's where the air is 100% saturated, even in the summer, okay? That's why you have dew on the grass, okay? Afternoon, about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, we're about as dry as it'll get. So there's this real interesting little video some of you might have seen about Christmas trees in your house. So we have a fresh Christmas tree, high fuel moisture, a Christmas tree that's been in your house for 3 weeks, and the needles have lost their moisture. And we have an ignition sparker on both of them. This is a great demonstration of what the difference in live fuel moisture will do, and humidity. Okay? High humidity, your tree's not going to dry out because nothing's sucking the air out of it. Low humidity, your tree's going to dry out very, very quickly. Okay, so we get back to this. Fuel, air, or weather, heat, ignition sources. Okay, so we're just going to expand this triangle to what's the practical reality of all of this. So let's get a little bit into fire behavior. Before you light, you should know what the fire is going to do. Here's some of the factors we think about of how fire spreads. Got a brush pile out there. This is just in Big Fork, Montana. Got grass around it. The weather's good. Not a lot of wind. Sometimes we want a little bit of wind to disperse smoke. Here we don't want wind because we don't want embers flying around the neighborhood. Okay, so the things we want to think about here is radiant heat is going to dry out the grass around it. Conduction is going to allow the grass to catch fire and snake its way out here. Okay, happens all the time. People get worried about it. Your most useful tool when you're burning piles is a shovel. Let it burn out a little ways till you have a black zone around the fire. Take your shovel and just snuff it out. Good convection column so that we're getting rid of the smoke. And we're not too windy so the wind is blowing things around either. This is a pile of debris that I had to burn. Good pile construction. My pile was this high. See my flame lengths? Again, 3 times as high on there. Rather than a wide pile, you want narrow, tall piles. Okay? And we want to think about what fuel is around your pile. How is it going to spread? So one of the rules with your burning piles is do not leave. Typically when I'm burning piles, I'm on them until 10 o'clock at night, or sometimes longer, depending on conditions. And this conduction, depending on your heavy fuel bed, this can last for a while, and it can creep around, and it can scare you a little bit. So here's one lit on January 6th. This is a month later. Okay, so fall versus spring burning. I'll talk a little bit more about that. What are the benefits? I prefer by far to burn in the fall, right when it's starting to snow, because then I have winter ahead of me and it's going to put stuff out. Spring burning is tricky. Okay, I do it, but I do it reluctantly because we're getting warmer, and that warmth can happen very fast. And if you have any kind of fire that's holding over, goes down into a rotten root, it can reemerge a month from now, and when it's hot and dry, 90 degrees out, and you have dried cheatgrass around or something like that. If you're using chipping and mulching and things like that for forest treatments, so you can burn in this, but you really have to worry about where that fire is going to go. And so I always build a scratch line around my piles in this kind of stuff because it's just, there's a lot of fuel on the ground there. It's not going to blow up on you and run away from you, but it's going to stay lit for a long time. Okay, a little bit about weather. So wind is your biggest factor when you're thinking about burning, okay? Because it dries stuff out, it adds oxygen to your fire, so your fire can get really, really hot. Just like a blacksmith has bellows to get the coals really hot to melt steel, okay? That's what wind does. So it increases oxygen, transports heat, burning embers. It'll bend the flames. I'll explain that. Tells you which way the fire is going to go. And if you're now looking at topography, we have this called chimney effect. So when we think about wind on this flame, remember we have radiation. And what the wind does, it blows over the hot gases and you have convection. And so your zone of preheating, remember your fuel, fire spreads because your fuel has to be preheated to about 600 degrees Fahrenheit before it ignites. Now you have radiation and convection that's preheating and your fire spreads a lot faster. This is actually one of my study sites that was not supposed to burn, but the wind picked up. This is the kind of wind we were getting, and it should have never lit because I knew a front was coming, and when a front comes across, you're going to get gusty winds. So, got to watch the weather. Weather. Same thing, here's a fire burning. I do a lot of burning at night because the humidity is high. And I had a lot of grass around this pile. You could see the ember storm coming off of here. Quite beautiful, but if the grass is dry, you're going to be putting out spot fires. Any guesses why we don't want to burn until there's snow on the ground? Okay, we have grass. This is a forest fire restoration project on this landowner. They salvage logged it, and we arrested erosion with woody debris and all that stuff. And we seeded it with grasses to stop erosion. And it worked beautifully, except now the grass is this tall. And you do not want to be burning in this anytime that there's any kind of risk, because the weather can change here quickly, the wind can pick up. So I told the landowner, we'll do a burn demonstration, but we'll only do it when there's snow on the ground. So wind is sometimes useful when you're doing prescribed burning because you're burning into the wind. Again, it is a skill and a science that people learn to do through years of experience. Okay, if you've never done it, I would recommend you don't do it. Okay, that's one of those things that you really got to learn about. Wind is sometimes good because it disperses the smoke. Another video, if you were light with the wind, the fire would escape. Okay, so this is again, burning is a skill, but what we want to watch for is weather. And so I'm always watching the long forecast of what it's going to do. And what I want to watch is not only temperature, but what's really important to me is the dew point. Okay, I want to burn when the dew point is going to reach the temperature, because that means my fine fuels are wet. So this dew point is really essential. It's when is the humidity going to be up? And in Montana, this is critical. I start to light when it starts raining. And I've got 4 days of rain predicted, because then I'm at my zero risk. The rain is going to put out my fines. That's all I'm worried about. If my big stuff is there, I can move it. Okay? But it's my fines that I'm worried about. We also want to think about smoke, because smoke affects everybody. So stable air, it's your fires, you don't have wind, but the smoke will sit where you are. You have to worry about inversions. That's why a lot of valleys, Missoula has very strict rules. Bitterroot Valley, same thing. Okay, you want to call in, and they might say you can't burn today because the smoke isn't going to go anywhere. Pile location. Okay, so all right, convinced me I'm going to burn piles. Well, in the middle of green meadow, away from other fuels. Yeah, that's ideal. So how big should you make your piles? Where should they be? I burn a lot in my forest. Make lots of little piles. okay, you can burn in between stems. Look where the canopies are. You don't want to burn up against the stem unless you want to kill the tree. But you don't need a lot. You just a little gap between the canopy where that convection can go up between your canopy. It's raining, it's snowing, your trees are hydrated. That fire is not going to do diddly squat to those trees. Okay? So lots of little piles. You don't have to drag that stuff around. So here's a spot. This is a part of the burn area we want to do out here in the Bitterroot. I do not like to put stuff in depressions. Okay? Because heat rises off of here. So I'm going to have radiation and convection around here. It's going to be really hard to work this pile. And when you're burning piles, you have to work them. That's my impact zone from radiation. I can't go near this dang thing to put it together to keep it burning clean, except for from downslope. I can't get near it because of all the heat coming off of there. So, you know, a depression might seem like a good place to build a pile. It's not. Build it up high because you want to stay below the heat, not above the heat. And how many piles and how big? You want tall, narrow piles, not wide piles. You just throw them together once or twice, and that's what you end up with. And I need to do nothing with this, okay? I did not get enough heat to have any negative effects on the soil. And this little spot is strategically located because I'm trying to get ponderosa pine regeneration. I got Doug fir in the shade, but I want ponderosa pine or larch regenerating, and they will only regenerate on disturbed soil. So where I locate my pile is where I want to promote conifer regeneration. Big piles are tougher to burn, okay? And again, this was part of a demonstration, huge machine pile, and too close to these trees. You're gonna get a lot of heat and you're gonna scorch all those trees. So here's the strategy. We lit right here because this is gonna burn itself again like a big cigar. And this debris on the back here is going to shield these trees from radiation. We had no wind, so convection was one of those things. Okay, no, I wanted to burn this, no wind, because any kind of wind and it's going to blow the heat into the trees. Okay, so we lit here, just on one side, and it's a slower burn, and it's going, and here we are. Just took pictures of it. On this fire, I could walk around. I did walk around where these trees are, and I could lean up against the pile. Because it wasn't burning. All that stuff, it was slowly burning its way through the pile. So by the time it got to where those trees are, the pile had burned down and the radiation load was much, much less. So strategy of how to burn the pile is also something you got to think about. Which side am I going to ignite on? Okay. If I ignite with the wind, it's really going to torch the pile. If I ignite against the wind, it's going to slowly work its way through the pile. Okay, this is the morning. You can see where the trees are. And of course, when you're burning, if you want consumption of that stuff, you got to throw all the edges together. Pile construction. Well, if you're going to wait till there's no risk and your pile is flat and wide, you have a lot more surface area that collects moisture, and this sucker is going to smoke and smolder and belch smoke for weeks on end. You're not getting concentrated heat. And so burning piles, you want concentrated heat. So here's a clean pile, no dirt. We're kind of doing a teepee design. We want to create a chimney. So when I ignite this, I want to get my fire in the center of the pile. Okay? Because as the fire burns in the center of the pile, the heat is going to radiate back on itself. And I'm going to get a lot of heat, and I'm going to get a total combustion. And I'm getting air coming in from the outside into it. So these are really dense piles, too dense. The denser they are, again, propane torch is working, but it takes a long time to get that heat built up and getting good air into the heat. That's the key. So we got this one going, but we were doing this for about an hour before it turned into that. Okay, and you know, if I'm conscious about my neighbors in the valley, an hour of that puts out an awful lot of smoke. Okay, and again, we want to be considerate because we're going to be restricted from burning if we're doing that. I have a little old Ford tractor with a front end loader. I put the bucket underneath. I did this same thing with this dozer. It has a brush blade on it. And I get it underneath there and I roll it. It rolls the dirt out of it. It rolls the fines out of it that are going to create all the smoke. And I get a nice pile of branches that has good aeration to it. So good aeration is really important. So this is one that was pushed together. You see all the fines that are just kind of slammed into that on the side? This sucker belched smoke for 3 hours before we finally got a good convection column in. What do we usually pile first? The coarse stuff. What do we pile on top last? The fine stuff. And we smother it, okay? But I purposefully built this pile differently, okay? So these are piles where I created a teepee with pines in the center and a place to put my torch with a good chimney that the heat and the air could get out. This one I stacked like shingles, stacked on top of its center. And the difference is, this one I can only ignite from the outside, not the inside. And this sucker was belching smoke for an hour before the heat got in the center. So we want to construct piles where we can light the inside, not just the outside. Okay? It's really important. It's not much more work to do them differently. It's just when you're piling debris, make a donut, make a teepee, but make sure that you got enough air. And again, you need to measure. If a bunny rabbit can crawl through it, you got enough aeration. If only a mouse can crawl through there, it's too tight. So some tricks when burning piles. Of course, tarping is a good thing in the fall. Keep it dry, it'll burn quicker and cleaner. You don't have to tarp the whole pile. If you have a big pile, just tarp the spot that you're going to light. Okay, so here, burning a pile, I'm getting a lot of convection, a lot of heat. I'm a little bit worried about the canopy on there. Okay, I have old corrugated steel roofing material. Okay, and I use that to direct where the heat is going to go. So by putting that over the top, I'm not getting that 30-foot flame convection column. I'm redirecting the heat back into the pile, and the flames will come out the side, but I'm getting a cleaner burn, and I'm not getting any scorch in my canopy. So that's before, after. I can use that also to lean up if I'm getting too much radiation on the stem. I'll lean it against the stem. All you need to do is block the radiation, and you're protecting the tree. This is a pile that was dozer piled, a lot of mineral soil in with the burn. That's what turned into pottery shards there. A lot of heat on this. If I don't rehab this, I come back 50 years, and that's what it's going to look like. Okay, what we want to avoid. Because thistles and knapweed, all other things we don't want. Trees are kind of like thistles and knapweed. Okay, they will germinate where there's disturbance. But this center ash layer that has 4 to 10 inches of ash and baked soil in it, it will not be suitable for anything to grow in except for thistles for 30 to 40 years. Now, it's not hard to rehab this, okay? And I'll show you how. Now, small piles, this is 3 years after I burned a small pile. It's called fire moss, by the way. It likes to grow on the ash, but I'm getting all sorts of seedlings in there, okay? So charcoal, not a lot of white ash, and I need to do nothing. And it's actually doing what I want it to do on that site, okay? So same thing, charcoal is good. Here's a bigger burn pile. So this center has the ash, the white ash. Nothing likes to grow on there. These are all larch seedlings on the edges. So the charcoal layer is great. The thick white ash layers will not recover on its own. So the way to do that is, here, before I get into that. So that's the larch seedlings that are grown there. No larch net regeneration in that entire stand except for the burn piles. Okay, so larch and ponderosa pine are like that. But if we go back to this, not that hard to do with a shovel. Again, heat doesn't like to go down. So you won't get the orange soil unless you have the soil in the pile. Okay, but that top inch of soil underneath the white ash will be baked. Okay, you hear a lot of the term soil's been sterilized. Okay, that is total unadulterated BS. Okay, heat does not go down into the soil. Okay, you have a very active biological community in that soil. And even a pile this size that burned all winter long, you go down 4 inches and the soil is perfectly good underneath that, okay, with biological organisms and all that. It's that top layer you got to break up. Okay, so I'll take my shovel and I'll just take the ash and fling it. And then I'll just scrape through that scorched soil, just break it up, rototill it if you will with your shovel or whatever, and it's good to go. I asked to do a rehab demonstration on this that I then studied for 5 years of what worked and what didn't work. So there's starting. I have a small Ford tractor. The big stuff I just piled together by hand. Then here's my tractor, and what I do is, remember I talked about that ash layer and that scorched top layer. It's only 1 inch thick. So I take my blade and I push across it, scraping up that skin of burned soil. And then I put my bucket over top of it, and I drag it back across and bounce my bucket. I want to create irregular topography that collects water and make microsites. Seeds need microsites, little shaded sites. So that's kind of what I'm left with. This charcoal, slightly burned organic matter is problematic. Nothing wants to grow on it. But if it's on the edges, that's okay. That's a natural thing. So there's critters that will utilize that. Just leave it alone. Here we go. That's what it looks like afterwards. Okay, irregular, just broke through that baked top soil layer. Okay, that allows water to move through. That's the main thing, and microsites. Okay, so that's spring of 2016. Now I divided these areas into quarters. A quarter where I did nothing. A quarter where I put mountain brome, which is a native grass occurring in the forests across Montana. Orchard grass and Dutch white clover. Okay, so that was my experimental design, and I wanted to see what worked best. So here I am in the summer after putting the seed down. Here's my control, knapweed and thistles. Here's my orchard grass. Here's my Dutch white clover. Here's my mountain brome. Okay. Here's 7 years later. Okay. So results, orchard grass by far was the best performer. Okay. Orchard grass is exotic, but the deer, the elk love it. They eat it. They actually keep it pretty low. Okay. I only got about maybe 5% invasion in the orchard grass by knapweed and thistles and things like that. So the Dutch white clover works great because it only lasts 4 or 5 years and allows the natives to invade onto the site. Okay. The orchard grass is still in there. It's somewhat competitive for the natives. But really, what I really want is I want the pine grass and elk sedge. That's what I want because it is the most competitive against weeds and everything else. Okay, and it doesn't create a fire fuel. Orchard grass will get that tall. It tries to stay green during the summer. So don't, by any means, don't use Timothy. Okay, so Timothy grows also that tall, but it cures out about mid-July, and then you have this huge fuel bed on your land afterwards. So, so slender wheatgrass is okay. But really, orchard grass, in all of my studies all across Montana, has proven to be the best. Pick one or two that you really want that will work, and don't add anything else, because what you need is 40 seeds per square foot to get good cover. Okay? If you do a mix, you'll get 2 seeds of this, 2 seeds of that, 4 seeds of something else. Maybe 2 will work, so you'll end up with 3 seeds per square foot that's going to germinate, and you're not going to get the cover that you need. Pick what will work and spend your money on that and get the seed cover that you need on the site. And, the bottom line, all this stuff, do what works best for you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. So, for demonstration, practical part of all of this, when you're burning, some of the stuff is no-brainer, but if you haven't burned a lot, some basic recommendations. If you do the actual practical burning class that we try to do in the fall, clothing, cotton or wool. Anything synthetic will melt. Leather gloves and safety glasses. And for me, the most useful tool is a shovel. For one, if your grass gets away from you, as I said, that 3-gallon weed sprayer comes in real handy. Water goes a long ways. But putting out a grass fire with a shovel, I've seen all these guys always trying to do a scratch line. No. If you're putting out grass fire, you're whacking the fire. You're snuffing it out by hitting it. You just get a little gas going. So I made a couple different piles here, okay? So that pile is about the same debris as that pile, but that one's stacked. So the heat goes up in the center and has a chimney in it. That one's stacked for convenience. I just kind of layered it on there. And then the last little bit, we always end up with pine needle duff. And that's the last thing. So I took some of that and threw on top of it just because that's what you usually end up with. I'll just set that under there and wait till I get some good flames going through it. But you can see all the smoke that one's generating. because there's not a lot of air getting in there. It takes a while for those flames to really start combusting that. This is not what we want to do. Now for comparison, and we'll get some initial smoke. Remember, it was raining and everything's wet, but that one is still belching pretty bad. And look how little smoke that's now, okay? So, which one is better? You know, and I mean, hardly any smoke off of it. It's gonna burn down a lot faster. And usually my piles are 4 to 10 times as big as this one. Again, that one is still belching smoke. This one is consuming. You see the wind effects. This one will burn down a lot faster, half the time. So you have less time to watch it. This will burn down in half an hour. And so efficiency, hardly any smoke. You're getting good complete combustion. That one is still belching. And it's the same fuel, same everything, just different configuration of how it's stacked. Okay, so then the issue came up, what about junipers? The shrubby, low-growing junipers around your house. There's a difference between the tall junipers and the short ones, okay? Sometimes same species. The short ones collect dead needles and dead branches. So it's not actually the green part of the juniper that's dangerous if it's well watered. It's the collection of dead crap that's in there that is the problem. If the junipers are well watered, they're not a fire hazard, okay? If they're cleaned up, they're not a fire hazard. It's only the ones that have collected all this dead material in them that are the real bad fire hazard. So I don't recommend junipers up against your house, but if you have landscaping junipers that are watered and well maintained, you don't necessarily have to yank them out. You know, there's that 30-foot zone around your house where nothing should be flammable. Then you have that 100-foot zone, because that's what radiation, at 100 feet, the most intense wildfire with 300-foot flames will not light your house just from radiation. That's Jack Cohen's research. So here we go. Let's see if there's any difference here in these. So is that explosive? It's because it's hydrated, okay? So it's trying to burn. It might actually go out. All right, so in comparison, this is just a little bit more dried. So it's catching fire a lot faster, and that's only 4 days of drying out, okay? Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see what's gonna happen here. Okay, so this is the juniper, ornamental juniper around your house with all the dead material underneath it, okay? It's not the green that's the issue, it's the dead stuff that's in there. And all conifers have a lot of pitches and terpenes and oils in them that burn very readily. But if they're fully hydrated, they're not going to want to catch fire very easily. So if you have a fire danger in the summer, that's when you want to keep your trees well watered. So, but as you can see, there's a huge difference. Same kind of fuel, just fuel moisture. Also, I'll feed my pile during the day, and that way, rather than have one huge pile, have a small pile that I'll just keep going by feeding it during the day, okay? Just common sense stuff. And it's fun. I mean, it really is. Take your shovel and flip the stuff on top of there, and you throw your fire together, always from the upwind side, of course. And pine needles, again, they accumulate all the time. I try to compost them. I mean, if I really want to burn them, then that's the way I'll do it, is I'll slowly add them. But I will not create a huge needle pile and light it. Okay, I think that's really irresponsible. And the problem is, it ruins it for all of the rest of us that want to burn. Because if you're producing too much smoke, you know what's going to happen. You're going to lose the right to burn. And we want to use fire as a tool. It's an important tool, so we need to use it smartly. So there's no risk. We're not smoking everybody out, and we're getting it to do what it needs to do. Okay? So that's all I've got for you.
Thank you.
You bet. Who wants to volunteer and watch these piles?